You know that feeling when you're staring at a massive, completely tangled knot of cables behind a television or a computer desk?
Oh, yeah. It is entirely overwhelming, just a total mess.
Right. And you just want to plug in like one single lamp, but you're looking at this absolute disaster of interwoven wires.
Exactly. And you don't know which thread is the main power line, and which is just, some old auxiliary cable.
Yeah. So you reach out, grab one cord, give it a slight pull.
And the whole thing just gets worse.
The entire knot just tightens into this harder, more impossible mass. Your brain just sort of, short circuits.
The physical reality of that knot actually perfectly mirrors a very specific type of cognitive overload. I mean, the harder you try to trace a single path, the more you lose the broader picture.
And honestly, that is exactly what it feels like when someone tries to explain a complex idea or pitch a new strategy without having a rigorous mental architecture in place.
We have all been on the receiving end of that mental cable knot, usually in a boardroom.
Oh, absolutely. You sit there politely nodding, but inside you're just desperately trying to untangle their words to find the actual point they're trying to make.
It's exhausting for the listener.
It really is. So today, for you listening, we're looking at a fascinating stack of notes from Elite Management Consulting that proves our natural instinct for arguing is, entirely backwards.
Completely backward, yeah.
We don't need to give people more data. We need a completely different blueprint for how we construct our thoughts.
The central premise of the source material we are examining today is a concept described as C2 level communication mastery.
Right, and just for context, in language learning, C2 denotes an absolute zenith of proficiency.
Yes, exactly. You aren't just fluent, you understand the deep underlying mechanics of the language.
So the actual plumbing of how it works.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And applied to communication and thought, this framework implies a level of structural rigor that, most people never realize even exists.
It's about building what the text calls a steel trap mind.
A steel trap mind, yes. But we really need to define what that actually means in practice for you, the listener, because it's incredibly easy to misunderstand what power looks like in communication.
Yeah, I think most people assume that being the dominant voice in a room means having a booming presence.
More an aggressive posture.
Right, or just overwhelming people with the sheer volume of words.
Exactly, and that is a fundamental miscalculation. This is emphatically not about being the loudest person in the room.
Or the most naturally charismatic either, right?
No, not at all.
Oh.
This is about being the clearest. It's about possessing a mental framework that is so intensely robust, so perfectly engineered, that your arguments become logically airtight.
Which sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So today we're going to explore 3 specific cognitive models used by top-tier strategic thinkers to deconstruct complex problems and anticipate counter-arguments before a single objection is even raised.
It's a very powerful toolkit.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to build this new architecture, the source material points out that we first had to tear down our default setting.
We have to unlearn how we naturally instinctively communicate.
Which brings us to the first major structural flaw most of us walk around with, which is called bottom-up reasoning.
It is the most common trap in professional communication, without a doubt.
So what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, when someone uses bottom-up reasoning, they start at the very base of an issue. They begin by laying out all the historical context, the raw data, the background of the problem.
Like what the competitor did last quarter or what the budget constraints are.
Exactly. They pour this entire foundation of information first, and then, very slowly, piece by painstaking piece, they attempt to build upward toward their ultimate conclusion or recommendation.
But wait, I'm struggling to see why that's inherently flawed. I mean, if we look at the tradition of rhetoric, isn't that just classic effective storytelling?
It feels like it, yes.
You set the scene, you introduce the variables, you build tension, and you guide the audience on a logical journey.
That's the instinctive thought process, sure.
Or think about a lawyer in a courtroom, right? A prosecutor doesn't just stand up during opening arguments, say the defendant is guilty, and then sit down.
Right, they wouldn't get very far with it.
No. They call witnesses, they establish a timeline, they introduce forensic evidence, building the case piece by microscopic piece until the jury has, no alternative but to arrive at the final conclusion.
It's a very compelling analogy.
So if it works in a courtroom, why is it considered a trap in a boardroom?
That is a critical distinction, and it gets to the very heart of why bottom-up reasoning is so insidious. It feels profoundly logical to the person speaking.
Because they already know the answer.
Exactly. And you were right. In a specialized legal proceeding where a captive audience, the jury, is mandated by law to sit in silence and absorb every detail for weeks. Well, it is the required format.
The jury's explicit job is to evaluate the foundation.
Right. But in the high-stakes, fast-paced environments, we are analyzing executive meetings, critical decision-making forums, strategic emails. The biological reality of the audience is entirely different.
Okay, biological reality. What do you mean by that?
We have to examine this through the lens of cognitive load and human working memory.
You mean the actual physiological limits of what the brain can hold at one time?
Precisely. Let's look at the underlying psychology. Have you ever heard of the cognitive psychologist George Miller?
The name is vaguely familiar, but I can't place it.
So in the 1950s, he published this foundational paper that's often referred to as the magical number 7 plus or minus 2.
Oh, right. The idea that we can only hold like 7 things in our head.
Exactly. Miller's research demonstrated that the average human brain can only hold roughly 5 to 9 items of information in its short-term working memory at any given moment.
Wow, just 5 to 9.
Yes. So when you argue from the bottom up, you are forcing your audience to do an immense amount of mental heavy lifting.
Because you're just handing them a dozen disconnected facts.
Figures, historical anecdotes, market trends. You are silently demanding that they juggle all these disparate pieces in their highly limited working memory,
While simultaneously waiting in suspense for you to reveal the actual point of the meeting.
Exactly. So as the speaker, you're essentially throwing 7, 8, 9 different balls at them.
And their brain is frantically trying to catch them all, but eventually they just start dropping things.
They drop the information, and more importantly, they experience physiological stress.
Stress from just listening to a presentation.
Yes, because when the human brain is subjected to prolonged ambiguity, when it doesn't know why it is being asked to process a stream of data, it triggers a mild anxiety response.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
The audience sits there thinking, why are you telling me about the Q3 marketing budget from 2 years ago? What am I supposed to be doing with this information?
And while they're silently asking themselves that question, they aren't listening to you anymore.
Exactly. Their cognitive load maxes out. In a busy professional world, your audience is already stressed.
They're time poor.
Highly time poor. Their attention is fractured across a dozen other operational fires. So when you force them to wade through a swamp of raw data before revealing the destination, they get frustrated, and their brains simply check out to conserve energy.
Which means by the time you finally reach your brilliant, carefully constructed conclusion, they've completely stopped caring.
The architecture has already collapsed under its own weight.
Okay, so the elite alternative, the antidote to this cognitive overload, is introduced in the text as the pyramid principle.
Yes, the pyramid principle.
And it is the exact polar opposite of our natural instinct, right?
It is a radical shift in posture. The pyramid principle demands that you argue exclusively from the top down.
Top down. Okay.
You start with the absolute peak of the pyramid. You state your single most important recommendation or conclusion in the very first breath.
No building up to it.
No build-up, no suspense. You do not build up to a reveal. You drop the answer right at their feet immediately. Only after you have planted that flag do you establish a layer of key supporting arguments. And only after those structural pillars are in place do you finally introduce the raw data and the evidence.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and evaluate your own communication habits here. Think about the last highly sensitive email you wrote to a client or an executive.
It's a sobering exercise.
It is. How much context did you force them to read before you actually stated what you needed them to do? It's a terrifying habit to break, honestly, because it feels incredibly vulnerable.
It goes against all our instincts.
Yeah, walking into a room and just declaring your conclusion without the armor of all your research already established, it feels naked. It feels like you're just asking for someone to attack you before you've proven you've done the work.
It does feel naked, but that is an illusion born from a lack of structural confidence.
Really?
Yes. When you deeply understand the mechanics of the pyramid principle, you realize that giving the answer first is actually the ultimate armor.
Okay, but how does just blurting out the answer protect you?
Because the protection doesn't come from just stating the answer. It comes from how precisely you engineer the layers beneath it.
I see.
The source material outlines 3 distinct levels for this, and the rules for each are exceptionally rigid.
Let's break down those 3 levels, because if you get the geometry wrong, the whole thing falls apart. Let's start at level 1, which the framework calls the peak.
Right, level 1. The peak is your single governing thought. It is the core answer to the central question being asked.
And what's the rule for this?
The absolute non-negotiable rule here is that it must be articulated in one perfectly clear declarative sentence.
Just one sentence.
One sentence. No run-on explanations, no compound caveats, no hedging. It is the thesis of your existence in that interaction.
That is strict.
It has to be. I like to use what I call the fire alarm test.
Ooh, what's the fire alarm test?
Imagine you stand up in a boardroom to present your strategy, and 30 seconds later, the building's fire alarm goes off, and everyone has to evacuate immediately.
Okay, complete chaos.
Exactly. What is the single sentence they take out the door with them in their heads?
That is a brilliant constraint. So if your peak is, well, we've been analyzing a complex matrix of supply chain variables over the last 6 months and taking into account macroeconomic shifts.
The fire alarm rings and you've said absolutely nothing of value. It completely fails the test.
Right. They leave the room with zero actionable information. So the peak has to be something like, we must relocate our primary manufacturing hub to Mexico by Q3.
Boom. That survives the fire alarm.
It's unambiguous.
Precisely. Now, once you have established that definitive peak, you immediately move down to level 2, which is the body of the pyramid.
The body. These are the key supporting arguments. The load-bearing walls holding up that single sentence.
Right. Level 2 consists of a highly curated group of arguments that directly justify the peak.
How many arguments are we talking about here?
The framework specifies this must be a tight grouping, almost always between 3 to 5 core arguments.
3 to 5. Going back to George Miller's rule, I assume.
Exactly. If you offer 8 arguments, you are violating those working memory limits again. You are overloading the system.
And if you offer only 1?
If you offer only 1, your peak appears structurally unsound. A pyramid can't stand on one pillar. So these 3 to 5 arguments act as the major categorical pillars.
And the text teases a very specific rule for these arguments, mentioning they must be MECE. We're going to spend a massive amount of time dissecting what MECE means later in this deep dive.
It is a critical concept.
But just to plant the seed for you listening, it essentially means these 3 to 5 pillars must not overlap with each other, and together they must cover the entire scope of the defense.
Perfect summary. We'll bracket that for now, though.
Yeah, we'll get deep into that later. So we have our single answer at the top and our 3 to 5 categorical pillars beneath it.
Only then do you descend to level 3, which is the foundation.
This is where all the actual data lives, right?
This is the basement. This is the domain of the spreadsheets, the consumer surveys, the historical case studies, the technical specs.
The stuff we usually want to start with.
Exactly, the bottom-up trap. But here is the critical structural rule for level 3. This data cannot just be a disorganized pile of facts.
It has to connect back up.
Every single data point in level 3 must be explicitly tethered to one of the specific arguments in level 2.
The data serves the argument. The argument serves the conclusion.
Exactly. It's a closed loop.
Okay, let's take this theoretical geometry and ground it in reality. The source text provides a scenario called the Product X case study.
That's a great example to use.
I want to role play this so the listener can genuinely feel the psychological difference between the two approaches.
Let's do it.
The scenario is a high-stakes board meeting. The singular question on the table is, should we launch Product X?
Okay, I will play the role of the skeptical executive holding the budget. I want you to give me the natural bottom-up version first.
The messy way.
Right, the way a well-intentioned but structurally flawed manager would instinctively answer.
Okay, I am the manager. You ask if we should launch. I take a breath, maybe shuffle my notes, and I say, well, if we look at the market research from the last 2 quarters, we're seeing some really consistent upward trends in consumer interest around this demographic. And, well, historically speaking, our main competitor executed a similar product launch last year that gained some pretty significant early traction. Furthermore, I was consulting with our production team yesterday, and they verified that we actually have the manufacturing capacity to handle a rollout without straining our current lines.
Okay.
So, you know, when you synthesize all those factors, I think it points to the fact that we should probably go ahead and initiate the launch.
Analyzing my internal reaction as the executive listening to that, it is an exhausting experience.
Really? Because it sounded like I was giving you good information.
You are giving me clues, but you aren't giving me direction. When you mention market trends, my brain immediately starts trying to calculate if those trends are reliable. Then you bring up the competitor. Now my brain is wondering if our strategy is just reactive mimicry.
I'm making you do all the work.
Exactly. You mentioned production capacity. Suddenly, I am worried about our supply chain overhead. I am juggling all these distinct cognitive heavy loads, trying to piece together where you are taking me.
By the time I finally say we should probably go ahead, it doesn't sound like a strategic imperative.
No, it sounds like a hesitant guess built on a pile of disconnected observations.
It completely lacks authority. It sounds like I'm trying to convince myself while I'm trying to convince you.
Exactly. Now, let's clear the board. Same boardroom, same stakes. The question is, should we launch product X? But this time, you deliver the pyramid principle version.
All right, I'll be the executive this time. Should we launch product X?
Level 1, the peak. Yes, we must launch product X immediately.
Okay, I'm listening.
Level 2, the body. My recommendation to launch is built on 3 core pillars. First, there is a verified, unaddressed market demand. Second, product X possesses a demonstrable, defensible competitive advantage. And third, the initiative is highly financially viable, projecting an 18-month return on investment.
Wow.
Level 3, the foundation. Now let's examine the data supporting that first pillar regarding the unaddressed market demand. If you look at the survey results on page 4...
Okay, hearing you say it that way, the psychological contract is just staggering.
It changes the entire feel of the room, doesn't it?
It completely shifts the power dynamic. But what is most fascinating to me is how my brain reacted to it. It felt like you handed me 3 clearly labeled empty folders right at the beginning.
That is the perfect analogy. You are providing cognitive relief.
Cognitive relief, I love that.
The human brain craves certainty and structure. When I say, yes, launch immediately, I have instantly eliminated the anxiety of the unknown destination.
I know exactly where we're going.
And when I say built on 3 core pillars, I have mapped out the exact terrain of the next 10 minutes. I have given you the folders.
Consequently, when you finally reach level 3 and start pouring out the complex consumer data, my prefrontal cortex doesn't have to burn energy trying to figure out what the data means.
It just seamlessly files that information into the market demand folder I already constructed for you.
You aren't forcing the audience to build the house while you hand them the bricks. You have already built the architectural frame, and now you're just walking them through the rooms.
It projects an aura of absolute command.
It really does. And that leads to the first piece of actionable application for you, the listener.
Highly actionable.
For the very next critical communication you draft, whether it's a strategy memo or a presentation deck, force yourself into this rigid pyramid structure.
Write your single declarative peak at the very top.
Bullet point your 3 core supporting arguments immediately below it.
And only then are you permitted to attach the data or dive into the deep context.
It's going to feel unnatural, perhaps even a bit aggressive at first.
It will, but it will radically elevate how your intellect is perceived by others. But if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Okay.
the pyramid is built, and it sounds impenetrable in a vacuum, but boardrooms aren't vacuums.
No, they are definitely not. The second you finish speaking, a stakeholder is going to try to poke a hole in one of your load-bearing walls.
Inevitably. They might attack your competitive advantage pillar or question your ROI projections.
So if your structure is so top-down and rigid, doesn't a single well-placed counter-argument bring the whole thing crashing down?
Yeah.
How do you defend a structure this exposed?
You defend it by attacking it yourself with devastating precision before you ever step foot in the room.
Okay, this introduces a fascinating paradigm from the source material. The concept of the master debater.
Yes. Now, a competent debater can stand at a podium, articulate their position, and parry incoming attacks. They know their own talking points, but the framework asserts that a master debater operates on a completely different level of strategic empathy. They can argue their opponent's position significantly better than their opponent can.
That requires a staggering amount of intellectual humility and foresight. You're essentially doing the enemy's homework for them. Why would an elite thinker spend their time doing that?
Because by fully inhabiting the perspective of the opposition, you map out the entire battlefield from their vantage point.
You see exactly where your pyramid looks weak from the outside.
Precisely. If you can articulate the absolute best version of an attack against your own idea, you can engineer a structural defense that neutralizes that attack before the opponent even realizes they wanted to make it.
And the mechanism the framework uses to operationalize this philosophy is a tool called the pre-mortem.
The pre-mortem.
Let's draw a clear distinction here, because anyone who has worked in a corporate environment for more than a month is deeply familiar with the post-mortem.
Yes, the post-mortem is standard operating procedure and usually a fairly miserable one.
It's awful. A project launches, it fails to meet KPIs, it goes wildly over budget, or it collapses entirely.
And months later, leadership convenes a meeting to dissect the corpse of the project.
They ask what went wrong. Who missed the signs? Why did this fail?
It is retrospective analysis. The damage is already done, the capital is already burned, and the exercise usually devolves into subtle finger-pointing and defensive posturing.
It's just looking backward at a car crash. A pre-mortem, however, requires a deliberate cognitive time jump.
It is an imaginary, exhaustively detailed analysis of a catastrophic failure before the project is even approved.
Before a single dollar is allocated or a single line of code is committed.
The execution of the pre-mortem is an exercise in applied imagination, and the text is very specific about the psychological framing required to make it work.
You can't just casually gather the team and ask, hey everyone, what do we think could potentially go wrong here?
No, that question is far too weak. It invites superficial answers. You have to force a complete perspective shift.
The text suggests a highly specific prompt. You stand in front of your team, or if you're a solo strategist, you sit alone with a notebook and you declare. I want everyone to close their eyes. Imagine it is exactly 1 year from today.
Setting the stage.
This project, the one we have poured our hearts into and are so optimistic about, has launched. And it has failed. Catastrophically. It is a complete, unmitigated disaster. It is an embarrassment to the division. The funding has been pulled. Now, open your eyes. We're going to spend the next 30 minutes writing down exactly why this disaster occurred.
It is a profound manipulation of the team's psychology.
It reminds me of a time travel heist movie.
A time travel heist, tell me more.
Yeah, imagine you're standing in the present looking at an impenetrable bank vault you want to rob. If you just go in blind, you're going to trigger a laser tripwire you didn't know was there.
Right.
But instead, you use a time machine to jump forward to a disastrous alternate future. A future where your crew got caught, the alarms blared, and everyone is in handcuffs.
Okay, I follow.
You walk around that terrible future and you steal the exact reasons for the failure. The thermal sensor in the air duct caught us. The getaway driver got stuck in parade traffic. The drill bit melted at 400 degrees.
That is fantastic.
You harvest all those failure points and you bring them back to the present day. Now, you know exactly which thermal sensors to bypass and what grade of drill bit to buy before you ever start the heist.
You are stealing failure from the future to purchase success in the present. That is a phenomenal analogy because it highlights the fundamental mechanism. You are extracting the vital data of failure without having to pay the catastrophic real-world price of actually failing.
It's brilliant.
But to truly understand why the pre-mortem is so powerfully effective, we have to look at the neuroscience and the sociology of corporate groupthink.
Oh, groupthink is so dangerous.
In a standard project kickoff meeting, the social pressure to display optimism is overwhelming.
Oh, it is suffocating. The toxic positivity of the boardroom. The executive sponsor is excited. The manager's bonus is tied to the launch. And the unspoken rule is that everyone must be a cheerleader.
Exactly.
If you raise a legitimate, deeply researched concern, you aren't seen as analytical. You are immediately labeled a naysayer, a roadblock, or someone who just isn't a team player.
And that social dynamic triggers a specific neurological response. When an employee considers speaking up against a boss's pet project, their amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, lights up.
It sees it as a literal threat.
The brain perceives challenging the group consensus as a threat to social survival and status, so people self-censor. They nod along with the optimistic projections while secretly harboring massive, highly accurate doubts.
The brilliant hack of the pre-mortem is that it entirely bypasses the amygdala.
It does.
How so? Just because you changed the rules of the game.
Precisely. By explicitly stating as an absolute fact that the project has already failed in this imaginary timeline, you remove the social risk of predicting failure.
You're no longer asking an employee to stand up and criticize the boss's brilliant idea.
No, you are asking them to solve a puzzle. You activate the prefrontal cortex, the logic and problem-solving center of the brain. You turn a career risk into an intellectual game.
In fact, in a pre-mortem, the team member who identifies the most fatal flaw isn't the annoying naysayer. They are the clever detective who figured out how the ship sank.
You have incentivized ruthless critique.
You make it a psychologically safe space to be utterly brutal. And the insights that surface during this time travel heist are usually the exact things that would have killed the project in reality.
Always.
The source text notes that this is when the real truth comes out. The lead engineer finally admits, well, it failed because the core server architecture we were relying on actually can't handle a concurrent load over 10,000 users, and we just didn't want to admit we needed to rebuild it.
Or the sales director says it failed because our compensation structure doesn't incentivize the sales team to push this new product over their legacy quotas, so they just ignored it.
These are structural vulnerabilities that a standard bottom-up or even a basic top-down presentation would completely ignore out of convenience or fear.
So through this pre-mortem exercise, you generate a terrifying, highly specific list of fatal assumptions, blind spots, and technical vulnerabilities.
But this brings us to the critical pivot. You do not just stare at this list of doom and cancel the project.
Right. The goal isn't to talk yourself out of taking action.
The goal is to use the stolen future data to fundamentally alter your present strategy. You take that terrifying list and you engineer a concrete solution for every single item on it.
You transform your original simple proposal into what the framework calls a risk-mitigated proposal.
A risk-mitigated proposal. This is where the master debater truly emerges, right? You weave the defense directly into the fabric of the pyramid you built earlier.
Exactly. Let's run the boardroom role play again to demonstrate this.
Okay, I am presenting the exact same pyramid structure for product X, but this time I am armed with the mitigation strategies we developed during our time travel heist.
I will play the skeptical executive again and try to attack your proposal.
Okay, I am listening to your 3 pillars, but internally, I am just waiting for you to take a breath so I can hammer you on the competitive landscape.
You're just waiting to pounce.
I know our rival is aggressive, and I think your market demand numbers are hopelessly naive.
So in a normal scenario, you would raise your hand, ask a hostile question, and I would be forced onto my back foot scrambling to defend my numbers.
Right.
But as a C2 level communicator, I preempt the attack. I am delivering my presentation, and before you even lean forward to interrupt, I say. Now, as we look at this launch strategy, I know several of you in this room are likely looking at Pillar 1 and feeling deeply concerned about how our primary competitor is going to react.
Which is exactly what I was thinking. Right. I continue. A highly rational fear is that the moment we launch, they will leverage their larger cash reserves to initiate a predatory price war and drown our margins. We have anticipated exactly that scenario. If you turn to the appendix on page 12, you will see a fully modeled 3-step contingency plan, which includes a pre-approved, localized promotional budget designed specifically to insulate our early adopters from aggressive competitor discounting.
Analyzing that from the executive's chair, it is utterly disarming.
Because I stole your bullet.
Exactly. The precise bullet I was loading into the chamber to shoot down your argument was just expertly caught and dismantled before I could even raise my hand. The psychological relief is immense, but the impact on my perception of you is even greater.
Let's push it further. I could continue and preempt the engineering concern. Furthermore, our internal analysis revealed that the single largest technical risk to this entire initiative is server latency during the first 48 hours of launch. We identified our current database structure as a critical single point of failure. Therefore, to mitigate this risk prior to launch, we have already negotiated a standby service level agreement for redundant cloud architecture. This system is programmed to automatically spool up secondary servers the moment traffic exceeds 80% capacity.
The meta effect of this strategy is profound. You haven't just won a debate tactic. You have fundamentally elevated your professional identity in the eyes of everyone in that room.
Wow. Yeah.
When you present a proposal that is this rigorously risk mitigated, you transition from being a mere proponent of an idea, a cheerleader hoping for the best, to being a steward of its success.
A steward of its success. I really like that phrasing. It carries a totally different weight. A cheerleader is just enthusiastic. A steward implies deep ownership, responsibility, and protective foresight.
It changes everything about how you are perceived.
But let me ask you a genuine question, pushing back on this a bit. If I stand up in a boardroom and spend half my presentation highlighting all the horrifying ways my own project could fail, doesn't that risk making me look paranoid?
It's a common fear.
Or worse, doesn't it look like I lack conviction in my own idea? Why should they fund it if I am pointing out all the holes?
It is a valid fear, but human psychology operates differently in leadership contexts. When a team or an executive board sees that you have proactively attacked your own ideas with far more ruthlessness and precision than they ever could, they do not see paranoia. They see unparalleled strategic foresight.
Oh, because I'm doing the hard work for them.
In classical rhetoric, this is how you build absolute ethos. Credibility, unshakable trust. When leaders realize you aren't blind to the dangers, that you actually see the dangers more clearly than they do and have already built the armor to survive them, they stop trying to attack your logic.
They surrender their skepticism because you have proven you are a safer pair of hands than their own. That is a massive paradigm shift. Which brings us to the second actionable piece of homework for the listener.
Get ready to write this down.
Before you commit to your next major strategic decision, or before you pitch your next big initiative, force yourself to execute a solo pre-mortem.
Take a blank sheet of paper and write a horrifying title at the top. 1 year later. Why this failed miserably.
Then force yourself to list 10 distinct, hyper-specific reasons for that imaginary catastrophe. Stretch your brain to find all 10. Don't stop at 3.
Once you have that list of vulnerabilities, write down one concrete, actionable mitigation strategy you can execute today for each of those 10 reasons.
Weave those mitigations into your pyramid. You will walk into the room infinitely stronger than when you started.
So we have the structure and we have the defense.
Right. Now, this brings us to a crucial structural threshold. We know how to build the argument beautifully using the top-down pyramid principle. We know how to defend it and anticipate attacks using the time travel heist of the pre-mortem.
But there is still a lingering anxiety.
Yes. How do we actually guarantee that our 3 pillars in the pyramid and our list of 10 risks in the pre-mortem are actually comprehensive? How do we know we haven't completely missed a massive gaping hole in our logic?
How do we prove that our analysis is totally bulletproof and mathematically complete?
This existential question leads us directly to the ultimate crowning structural rule in this entire framework.
This is where we leave mere communication tactics behind and enter the architecture of pure thought.
The architecture of pure thought.
The source framework introduces a conceptual tool that serves as the absolute gold standard for structuring information among elite management consultants, complex systems engineers, and research scientists. It is an acronym, MECE.
MECE. Pronounced MECE.
Correct. It stands for Mutually Exclusive, Collectively Exhaustive.
Mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. It is quite a mouthful, and it sounds like something you find in a dense textbook on formal logic.
It does sound academic, but the application is incredibly practical.
We need to break these two halves down meticulously, because the underlying mechanism is brilliant, and if you master it, it makes your thinking nearly invincible. Let's start with the first constraint. Mutually exclusive. What is the literal definition here?
Mutually exclusive dictates that when you take a complex problem or a massive data set and break it down into component categories, those subcategories must have zero overlap.
Zero overlap.
There can be absolutely no shared territory between Category A and Category B. They must be distinctly isolated entities. This rule exists to prevent analytical messiness, double counting of resources, and the mental confusion that arises when a single piece of information could technically belong in 2 different places.
Okay, rigid boundaries. Zero overlap. Now, what about the second constraint? Collectively exhaustive.
Collectively exhaustive dictates that when you add all of those distinct, non-overlapping categories back together, they must account for exactly 100% of the total original problem.
100%. No more, no less.
They must encompass every possible option, variable, or outcome within the defined universe of the problem. There can be no gaps, no missing pieces, and no unaccounted for blind spots.
So the ultimate rule is no overlaps, no gaps.
That's the mantra. No overlaps, no gaps.
To ground this abstract logic in everyday reality, I want to use an analogy that I think perfectly illustrates the mechanics of sorting. Let's talk about doing laundry.
A very relatable problem.
It is a mundane, universally understood task, but it's a perfect sandbox for testing logical structures. Imagine you have a massive, chaotic pile of dirty laundry dumped on your bedroom floor.
Okay.
That pile represents your complex, tangled business problem. Your job is to sort it into baskets so you can process it. Let's say a well-meaning person decides to sort the laundry into 3 baskets labeled shirts, pants, and red clothes.
Okay, let's submit that structure to the MECE test. Is it a logically sound way to process the problem?
Let's test the first rule. Mutually exclusive? Do the categories overlap? Yes, catastrophically.
Okay.
If I pick up a red shirt from the pile, where does it belong? By definition, it belongs in the shirts basket, but it equally belongs in the red clothes basket.
Ah, I see. You have created a logical overlap.
Exactly. I'm standing there holding a red shirt, paralyzed by a flawed system.
And now let's test the second rule. Collectively exhaustive. Does this system cover 100% of the pile?
What happens when I pick up a pair of blue socks? They are not shirts. They are not pants. They are not red.
You have discovered a massive gap.
The system failed to account for the entire universe of laundry. Therefore, the shirts, pants, red clothes structure is entirely non-MECE. It is sloppy, flawed thinking.
It is a perfect demonstration of how quickly a seemingly intuitive categorization system shatters under the weight of logical scrutiny. So how does a C2 level thinker redesign the laundry system to be perfectly MECE?
We abandon descriptive categories and pivot to categories based purely on the operational constraint of the washing machine itself: temperature and dye transfer.
Okay, so what are the new baskets?
We label the three baskets: whites, darks, and colors.
Let's run the rigorous test again. Are they mutually exclusive?
Yes, absolutely. A white t-shirt cannot mathematically be a dark, and a black pair of jeans cannot be a color. There is zero overlap between the definitions of these categories. A single piece of clothing can only exist in one specific basket.
And are they collectively exhaustive?
Yes. Every single item in that chaotic pile on the floor, whether it is a neon pink sock, a pitch black towel, or a bleach white undershirt, must inherently fall into one of those three domains.
We have successfully accounted for 100% of the pile with zero gaps and zero overlaps.
The chaos is perfectly logically ordered.
The laundry analogy is brilliant for grasping the mechanics. It proves that MECE is ultimately about defining the boundaries of a system.
Exactly. But doing laundry is pretty simple.
Right. The true power of this framework isn't unlocked until we elevate that exact same logical rigor to a highly complex, chaotic business scenario.
Let's do that.
I want to look at a modern, tangled problem, something much more nuanced than the basic revenue minus cost math often used to explain MECE. Let's imagine a legacy media and publishing company.
Okay, legacy media.
The executive board is facing an existential crisis. Should they completely pivot their entire business model to rely on AI-generated content?
Wow, okay, that is a massive, incredibly messy problem. There are 100 variables: ethics, technology, cost, employee backlash, copyright law, brand reputation.
It's a complete tangle of wires.
If I am the strategy lead tasked with presenting a recommendation, a standard non-MEC approach would be to walk in with a slide deck listing my primary concerns.
Show me what that sounds like.
I might say, board members, as we consider this AI pivot, we need to focus on 4 key areas. Number 1, the technical cost of the AI models. Number 2, the potential damage to our brand trust. Number 3, our internal editorial workflows. And number 4, the risk of copyright infringement lawsuits.
To a layperson, that sounds like a very thorough, proactive analysis. You hit major buzzwords.
It sounds like I did my homework.
It does. But to a C2 level thinker, that structure is a logical disaster. It fails the MECE test instantly.
Why? Where does it break down?
Let's test for mutually exclusive. You listed brand trust and copyright infringement lawsuits as separate categories.
Yeah, they seem different.
But if you get hit with a massive copyright lawsuit because of your AI, doesn't that inherently destroy your brand trust?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it totally does.
The categories massively overlap. A single event triggers both. Furthermore, let's test for collectively exhaustive.
Okay, where's the gap?
You listed costs, brand, workflow, and legal. But what about audience demand? What if you build the perfect, legally compliant, cost-effective AI system, and the audience simply refuses to read machine-generated text?
I didn't even mention the readers.
You have a massive blind spot. Your framework has gaps and overlaps. It is the shirts, pants, red clothes basket all over again. It makes clear decision-making impossible because the variables are tangled.
Okay, I see the mess. The variables are bleeding into each other. So how do we wipe the whiteboard clean and apply a pure MECE structure to this existential AI pivot?
We have to find a fundamental dividing line that cleanly splits the entire universe of the problem in half.
Just right down the middle.
A master strategist might approach the whiteboard and say, the decision to pivot to an AI model hinges entirely on 2 non-overlapping domains, internal feasibility and external viability.
Let's test that immediately. Mutually exclusive.
Yes.
Internal feasibility, meaning can our company actually build and afford this system, is completely distinct from external viability, meaning will the outside world accept and pay for it?
Exactly. The internal mechanics do not overlap with the external market reaction.
And collectively exhaustive.
Let's see. Every single one of those messy variables we listed earlier, costs, lawsuits, audience demand, editorial workflows, must logically fall into either the internal operations bucket or the external market and legal bucket.
It works. We've covered 100% of the risk universe.
Precisely. You have established a perfectly MEC peak. Now, the discipline requires you to break down each of those branches further, maintaining MECE at every single sublevel.
So nesting it.
Let's look at the external viability branch. We can divide this into two mutually exclusive categories. Audience acceptance, meaning will readers consume it, and regulatory and legal compliance, meaning will the government or copyright holders sue us?
Again, perfectly distinct. The audience's opinion of the content has zero overlap with the judge's ruling on copyright law. They are separate external forces.
You continue this branching process all the way down to the granular data. You create a pristine logical tree where every single leaf is distinct, and when you trace the branches back up, they sum perfectly to the trunk of the tree.
There is no double counting, no confusion about which department owns which risk, and no missing variables.
It is a thing of beauty.
I deeply appreciate the architectural beauty of that structure. I can see how it clarifies the mind of the analyst.
It is immensely clarifying.
But I have to play the role of the pragmatic listener here. I am trying to improve my communication in aggressive meetings. So what?
So what?
How does having a perfectly sorted, mathematically pure mental tree actually help me win a vicious argument in a boardroom? It feels highly analytical, but is it actually persuasive?
This is where we transition from understanding MECE as a private analytical tool to deploying MECE as an offensive weapon of debate.
An offensive weapon. I like the sound of that.
What is truly fascinating here is how structuring an argument in a MECE format fundamentally alters the physics of the room.
Alters the physics.
When you present a framework that is unassailably mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, you construct a closed perimeter. You leave your opponent with absolutely nowhere to go.
Because there's no gaps for them to squeeze through.
Exactly. You have quite literally fenced them in.
You trap them in your logic. Let's use the project delay example from the source text to see how this psychological dominance plays out in real time.
Imagine you are managing a high-profile initiative, and it is catastrophically behind schedule. The stakeholders are furious, and you are hauled into an executive meeting to explain the failure.
The worst meeting of your life.
A normal, non-MEC response is to arrive with a messy, bottom-up list of excuses.
Right, so I'd say, well, the primary software vendor was 3 weeks late delivering the API, and then we discovered a critical bug in the legacy code. And unfortunately, the lead developer took an unexpected medical leave.
That immediately invites chaos. The stakeholders will just start attacking whichever excuse irritates them the most.
It is blood in the water.
But watch how the MECE framework allows you to control the narrative entirely. The source text gives a phenomenal script for this.
Okay, let's hear it.
You walk into that hostile room, stand at the head of the table, and you declare, there are only two possible fundamental reasons for this project's delay. Either our initial timeline was completely unrealistic from the very beginning, or our execution of that timeline was flawed. Let's examine the initial timeline first.
I want you to analyze what just happened to the power dynamic in that room.
You didn't just offer a pathetic excuse. You established the complete, absolute universe of possibilities.
Is it logically possible that the project was delayed for a reason that is neither a flawed initial timeline nor flawed execution?
No. Those two broad categories are collectively exhaustive, they cover everything, and they are mutually exclusive. Planning the work is distinct from doing the work.
You have drawn a concrete box around the entire problem.
You have created a closed logical system. This is the masterstroke of the C2 level communicator.
By framing the problem with this inescapable logic, you force the entire subsequent hour of discussion to happen exclusively on your terms.
Any point, any grievance, any angry excuse that your stakeholders bring up must, by definition, fall into one of the two categories you just defined.
So if a furious VP yells, but the external vendor didn't deliver the API on time,
you calmly, authoritatively reply, exactly. That falls precisely under our second category. Flawed execution, specifically regarding external vendor management. Let's open that branch of the issue tree and look at the mitigation steps.
and if another VP counters with, we didn't realize how long the legal compliance review would take.
You say, precisely. That falls under our first category. An unrealistic initial timeline. We failed to scope the legal phase correctly during planning.
You aren't just controlling the conversation. You are dictating the very laws of physics of the universe the conversation exists in.
You are the architect of the game board, and the executives are just moving their pieces exactly where you tell them to.
It creates an impenetrable aura of unassailability.
It does. When intelligent people realize that your thinking is so mathematically rigorous or tightly bound by logic, they realize that picking your argument apart is going to require more mental processing power than they currently possess.
To prove you wrong, they have to find a logical gap that you haven't covered or an overlap you haven't eliminated.
And when they can't find one, they concede to your structure.
Now, I have to push back on this, because reality is rarely as clean as a whiteboard. I am getting stuck on the mutually exclusive part when we apply it to complex business timelines.
Okay, where are you seeing an issue?
Let's go back to our profit tree, revenue minus costs. You said increased revenue or decreased costs are mutually exclusive.
Yes.
But what if our strategy is to invest heavily in a massive, expensive new R&D department to invent a new product? We are actively increasing our short-term costs for the express purpose of increasing our long-term revenue. Suddenly, those two branches are intrinsically linked. They overlap across time. How does a MECE structure handle the messy reality of time horizons and delayed ROI? Doesn't the whole thing break down?
That is a phenomenal challenge, and it hits on the exact limitation of basic two-dimensional MECE trees. You are entirely correct. Time introduces overlap if you don't account for it.
So how do you fix it?
The advanced C2 level solution is that you must add time itself as a distinct MECE dimension to your framework.
How does that work in practice?
Before you split the problem into revenue and costs, you first split the problem by time horizons. You declare, to improve the valuation of this company, we must look at two mutually exclusive timeframes. Short-term cash flow optimization, let's say 0 to 12 months, and long-term enterprise value creation, 1 to 5 years.
Oh, I see.
Those two timeframes are perfectly mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive of our strategic window. Then, within the short-term bucket, you apply the revenue and cost cuts, and within the long-term bucket, you apply the R&D investment strategy.
You resolve the contradiction by nesting the variables inside a perfectly defined temporal boundary.
Exactly. You just build a bigger, cleaner box to hold the messy variable. You don't abandon the logic, you expand the architecture.
That is incredibly powerful. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most mentally demanding, actionable takeaway for you listening.
This is the real test.
The next time you are facing a truly intractable, complex problem, a massive strategic pivot, a tangled interpersonal conflict spanning multiple departments, a logistical nightmare that is keeping you awake, do not just try to think your way through it in a messy, bottom-up stream of consciousness way.
Stop, grab a whiteboard or a massive sheet of paper,
And force yourself to draw an AEC issue tree.
Start with the absolute core problem at the very top, the trunk of the tree.
Then force your brain to break it down into primary components that are strictly, ruthlessly, mutually exclusive, and collectively exhaustive.
If you stare at your two branches and find even a sliver of overlap, erase it and start over.
If you realize there's a scenario that doesn't fit in your branches, you have a gap. You haven't finished the job.
Once you have that first layer perfectly MECE, challenge yourself to break each of those branches down one more level using the exact same rules.
I guarantee you the physical process of forcing your brain to abide by these strict logical constraints will clarify your thinking in a way you cannot even imagine until you actually try it.
The rigor acts as a crucible. It burns away the sloppy assumptions and leaves your thoughts structurally unassailable.
And synthesizing all of this brings us to the profound realization of what this source material is actually attempting to impart.
We have walked through 3 distinct, powerful frameworks today.
We started with the pyramid principle. This is your tool for architecture and structure. It is how you ensure you are arguing from the top down, planting the answer first, and deeply respecting the fragile cognitive load and working memory of your audience.
Then we explored the premortem. This is your tool for anticipation and strategic defense.
It is how you utilize the imaginary time travel heist to bypass the amygdala's fear of groupthink, uncover fatal flaws before they manifest, and transform a naive proposal into an impenetrable, risk-mitigated strategy.
And finally, we unpacked the MECE principle, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive. This is your tool for creating a logically flawless universe.
It ensures your pyramid has no missing bricks, and your premortem has no hidden blind spots. It allows you to draw a box around the problem and dictate the terms of the engagement.
What is vital for the listener to internalize is that these are not mere communication tricks.
No, they're not.
They are not rhetorical flourishes, vocabulary hacks, or charismatic posturing. They are, at their absolute core, systems for pure thought. They represent the underlying invisible scaffolding of a disciplined mind.
And the text explicitly warns that adopting this is not going to be easy. It calls it a workout for a reason.
They require immense cognitive discipline to apply consistently. When you are under pressure, your brain's natural instinct will always be to revert to the comfortable, messy, bottom-up way of explaining things, hoping the sheer volume of data will save you.
But mastering these 3 frameworks is the secret code.
It is the secret code. It is the invisible mechanics that allow elite thinkers to consistently project an aura of piercing intelligence, extreme clarity, and unshakable authority.
When you master these tools, you don't just win arguments in the boardroom. You frequently prevent the arguments from ever even starting, simply because your logic is so demonstrably mathematically sound from the very first breath you take.
That is the ultimate C2 level goal. To be so structurally sound that opposition just naturally melts away because there's nothing solid for it to grip onto.
This deep dive was specifically designed to give you, the listener, a decisive, unfair intellectual edge in any high-stakes scenario you walk into this week. We want you to take these mental blueprints, get out your whiteboard, and start building.
But before we officially conclude, the deep implications of these frameworks raise a fascinating, almost philosophical puzzle that isn't explicitly resolved in the source text.
Ooh, a puzzle.
But it naturally emerges from the mechanics of what we've discussed. It is something for you to ponder long after this audio stops.
Jay, lay it on us.
We just established that MECE allows you to create a perfectly closed logical system. You draw a rigorous box, and you trap your opponent's arguments inside your carefully defined categories. You become the architect of reality in that room.
Right. You define the game board, so you win the game.
But what happens when 2 master thinkers face off against each other?
Oh, wow.
Imagine 2 C2 level communicators walk into the exact same executive boardroom, tasked with solving the exact same impossibly complex problem. But because they worked independently, each of them has secretly prepared a completely different, perfectly MECE framework to solve it.
Both are perfect.
Yes. One divided the universe by internal and external viability. The other divided it by short-term and long-term timelines. Both frameworks are entirely free of overlaps. Both are completely devoid of gaps. They have carved up the universe in 2 totally distinct but internally flawless ways.
Oh, that is a brilliant paradox.
When those 2 distinct, impenetrable logical universes collide in the middle of the table, what dictates the outcome? Does the most objectively logical argument still win, even if both are structurally perfect?
Or does ultimate power simply belong to the person who manages to speak first, forcing their frame onto the room before the other person can establish theirs?
That is the question.
That is a chilling thought. Does logic win, or does the architect who builds the fastest win? Does whoever draws the box first get to trap the other master thinker?
It's an incredible puzzle to leave you with, and it speaks volumes about the staggering, almost terrifying power of structure in human communication.
Remember that feeling we talked about at the very beginning of this hour? Staring at that impossible, overwhelming knot of tangled cables, feeling your brain short-circuit as you pull the wrong thread.
It's a terrible feeling.
You now possess the exact cognitive tools to ensure you never feel that way in a professional setting again, and perhaps more importantly, to ensure you never inadvertently inflict that terrible feeling on anyone listening to you.
You know how to untangle the wires by starting at peak.
You know how to anticipate the failure by traveling to the future.
And you know how to sort the chaos by eliminating the gaps and overlaps.
Take these frameworks, test them out in a low-stakes email tomorrow, build up to a major presentation, and keep building that unassailable architecture in your mind. Until next time, keep thinking clearly.
Right now, as you listen to this, you are bound by literally thousands of rules you've probably never read.
Oh, absolutely. And written by people you've never met.
Right, exactly. And if you happen to break one of those rules, the state has the legal right to step in, use physical force, and, take away your freedom.
Which is a staggering amount of power when you actually start to think about it.
It really is. And we rarely think about the sheer magnitude of that power until we're suddenly caught in its crosshairs, or maybe you're sitting on a jury or just watching some high-profile trial on the news.
Yeah, that's usually when it hits people.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into the architecture that makes all of that possible. We are unpacking a really comprehensive stack of source material that breaks down the entire legal world from the absolute ground up.
It's such a fascinating stack of documents, too.
Yeah, our mission today is basically to decode the system for you. We're going to start with the street-level mechanics of an arrest and scale all the way up to those massive philosophical debates about whether the laws governing us are actually just.
Which is a phenomenal framework, honestly, because the legal system operates like this, like a giant machine running in the background of our society.
Right.
And you really don't need a law degree to understand how the gears turn. I mean, whether you're trying to make sense of a Supreme Court ruling or you just want to understand the nuances of a local true crime case, having this vocabulary completely changes how you view things.
It changes everything. So let's start at the absolute foundation, right? The street level, where the system first actually interacts with a person.
The entry point.
Exactly. The fundamental definition we're working with here is that laws are simply society's codified rules. And at this entry point, the system operates on a very strict, uncompromising binary.
Right, the on-off switch.
Yeah. You are either innocent, meaning you're operating, within the rules, or you are guilty of breaking them.
And that binary is essential. It's the core engine that powers the entire legal apparatus.
Because without it, nothing happens.
Exactly. The state actually requires that black and white distinction to function. When an offense occurs, the machinery kicks in to categorize the event and the people into very specific roles.
Like assigning parts in a play?
Pretty much.
But
The state deploys law enforcement to intervene. Someone is labeled the victim, the person who suffered the harm, and someone is labeled the perpetrator.
which triggers that sequence of consequences we all know. An arrest is made, the individual is moved into the court system, and a judge eventually dictates a penalty, like prison.
It's very predictable.
It's like the plot of a basic 30-minute television procedural, right? It's the simple cause and effect we're all taught first. A thief steals something, the police arrive and arrest the bad guy, a judge bangs a gavel, and they go to prison.
Case closed. Roll the credits.
Exactly. But it's not actually that simple.
No, not at all. I mean, we find a lot of comfort in that 30-minute narrative structure because, well, human beings crave certainty.
We like good guys and bad guys.
Right. Those basic concepts of innocent and guilty provide a really clean, digestible version of reality. But the actual administration of justice is entirely focused on the massive, super messy gray area.
The space between the arrest and the prison sentence.
Exactly. Because the police making an arrest is, legally speaking, merely the state declaring a hypothesis.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, they only suspect an individual committed the act. They haven't proven anything yet.
So to convert that hypothesis into a definitive guilty verdict, the state has to prove it, which shifts us from the street level to the courtroom level, or what the sources call the machinery.
Right. This is where the gears really start grinding.
So the investigation phase happens first. Law enforcement gathers physical evidence, interviews witnesses, builds a timeline, and once formal charges are filed, the terminology shifts.
The vocabulary gets an upgrade.
Yeah, the suspect officially becomes the defendant. I've always found that term super interesting because it inherently implies an incoming attack.
That's incredibly perceptive, yeah.
Because they're defending themselves against the full weight of the state.
And the state is represented by the prosecution, which sets up the fundamental dynamic of the courtroom. It's an adversarial system.
Two sides locking horns.
Literally. You have two opposing forces. On one side, the prosecution is actively trying to prove the defendant's guilt. On the other side, the defense attorneys are actively working to dismantle the prosecution's case.
They're trying to prove innocence, or at least, cast doubt on the whole thing.
Right. But before we get into the mechanics of that battle, we should probably clarify something about the charges themselves.
Oh, yeah. Because the severity of the punishment is obviously tied to the severity of the crime.
Exactly. Minor infractions like speeding versus serious felonies like murder.
Wait, let's actually unpack this for a second because the sources get into some specifics here. Are robbery and burglary just fancy, interchangeable legal jargon for theft?
It's funny you ask that because people use them in casual conversation as if they mean the exact same thing.
I do it all the time. Like, oh, my car was robbed.
Right. But legally, they are entirely distinct mechanical actions. And this highlights how incredibly precise legal terminology has to be.
Okay, so what's the difference?
So theft is just the broad umbrella term for taking something that isn't yours. But the specific charge dictates the exact narrative the prosecution has to prove in court.
Okay.
Robbery requires the element of force, or at least the threat of force, against a person. You are taking something directly from someone through intimidation or violence.
Like a mugging.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas burglary doesn't necessarily require interacting with a person at all. It specifically involves the unlawful entry into a building with the intent to commit a crime inside.
Oh, wow. So the physical mechanics of how the rule was broken completely changed the legal categorization.
And that, in turn, radically alters the potential prison sentence.
Which is wild. So establishing those physical mechanics is the entire point of the trial, right?
It is. But if you step back and look at the trial itself, it's not some clinical scientific search for objective truth.
It's not a lab experiment.
Not at all. It is fundamentally a battle of competing narratives. The prosecution and the defense are often looking at the exact same pile of evidence.
Like the same phone records, the same witness statements, the same photos.
Exactly. Yet they construct two wildly different stories to explain that same evidence.
And the audience for those stories is the jury. 12 ordinary people pulled from the community who just sit there between these two highly trained legal teams, listen to both narratives, and ultimately deliver a verdict.
It's a huge responsibility.
It really is. And once that verdict is delivered, if it's guilty, the judge steps in to determine the actual sentence. But, I mean, placing the ultimate decision in the hands of 12 random people listening to competing storytellers sounds incredibly volatile.
It sounds chaotic.
Yeah. Like, what is stopping a highly charismatic prosecutor from just spinning a compelling fiction and steamrolling a totally innocent defendant?
That specific vulnerability is exactly why the adversarial system is restrained by a really rigid framework of fundamental principles.
Which brings us to the analytical level of our sources.
Right. The process isn't a free-for-all. It is governed by rules of engagement designed specifically to mitigate that massive power imbalance between the individual and the state.
Because the state has basically unlimited resources.
Exactly. So the most critical of these principles is the presumption of innocence. The defendant is legally innocent until the moment the state conclusively proves otherwise.
Which places the burden of proof entirely on the prosecution's shoulders. The state brought the charges, so the state has to do the heavy lifting.
They have to build the entire case.
You know, I usually think about the burden of proof through, like, a sports or game analogy.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, if the trial is a game, the defense doesn't actually have to score a single point to win.
Right.
They don't have to definitively prove the defendant was somewhere else or prove who the real culprit was. They just have to play defense and block the prosecution from scoring.
They just have to run out the clock, essentially.
Yeah. If they can knock down enough of the prosecution's arguments to create a barrier, they win.
And in legal terms, that barrier is called beyond a reasonable doubt.
Which is a famously high bar.
It is an astronomical hurdle. The defense only needs to inject enough legitimate skepticism into the minds of the jury to make them hesitate.
So the prosecution can't just be like, he probably did it.
Exactly. The standard isn't probably or even highly likely. Beyond a reasonable doubt requires the jury to possess a moral certainty of the defendant's guilt, based solely on the evidence presented.
And while the prosecution is sweating, trying to clear that massive hurdle, the defendant is shielded by specific legal rights, too.
Yeah, the constitutional safeguards.
Like, they have the right to remain silent, which ensures they aren't forced to accidentally contribute to the state's case against them.
Which is huge.
And they also have the right to legal counsel, meaning, you know, if they can't afford to hire their own defense, the state is obligated to provide an attorney for them.
Just to ensure the adversarial battle actually has two sides. Otherwise, it's just a steamroller. Those rights act as the pressure valves of the entire system. If the prosecution fails to overcome the burden of proof, the trial concludes in an acquittal, and the defendant walks away.
Free and clear.
But if the prosecution succeeds and secures a guilty verdict, the system still offers a secondary pressure valve, which is the appeals process.
Where they go to a higher court.
Right. The defendant can petition an appellate court to review the trial. And it's important to note, they aren't necessarily arguing their innocence again.
Oh, wait, really? Then what are they arguing?
They're arguing that the underlying rules of engagement were violated. You know, maybe evidence was mishandled or the judge gave bad instructions, rendering the process itself unfair.
Okay, so that makes sense. Before we move on, we should probably draw a hard line here between the criminal system we've been talking about and the civil system.
That's a crucial distinction. The sources make a very clear separation there regarding civil law.
Because civil courts handle disputes between private parties, right? Like individuals or corporations fighting over a breached contract or property damage.
Exactly. The stakes are entirely different.
Yeah, there's no prosecution, there's no threat of prison. And instead of a guilty verdict, the losing party is simply found liable for damages, which is usually just financial.
Right. The mechanisms look similar. You still have lawyers and a judge, but the ultimate outcomes are completely separate.
So returning to the criminal side, if the defendant is found guilty, all the appeals are exhausted, and the judge finally imposes a prison sentence, we arrive at the real philosophical core of the entire legal framework.
The big so what question.
Yeah. Why are we punishing this person?
Are we just locking them away because society is angry?
Well, the literature outlines 4 distinct purposes for criminal punishment, and they're fascinating.
They really are. What's the first one?
The first is retribution, which is definitely the most primal. It's essentially codified revenge.
An eye for an eye.
Exactly. The individual caused harm to the social order, so the social order inflicts proportional harm back on the individual.
Which is a very ancient concept.
Then the second purpose is deterrence. This uses the punishment as like a billboard to scare the broader public.
Right, setting an example.
Yeah. The idea is that if people see the severe consequences of a crime, they'll choose not to commit it themselves.
Which pivots us to the third purpose, which is rehabilitation.
Right, a totally different vibe.
Completely different. This philosophy operates on the belief that the system should intervene to actually change the offender's underlying behavior.
Like through education or addiction treatment or psychological support.
Exactly. So they do not reoffend upon release. And then the fourth and final purpose is incapacitation.
Which sounds very clinical.
It is. It is purely logistical. It's the physical removal of a dangerous individual from the community just to eliminate their ability to cause further harm.
But looking at those 4 goals, retribution, deterrence, rehabilitation, incapacitation, they seem fundamentally at odds with one another.
They absolutely are.
Because, I mean, if a system is entirely focused on retribution and punishing someone as harshly as possible, that environment is probably going to destroy any chance of meaningful rehabilitation, right?
Exactly. They're in constant friction.
Yeah.
And the way a society chooses to balance those 4 competing priorities essentially defines the physical reality of its justice system.
Wow. Yeah.
Like a system that prioritizes incapacitation and retribution is going to build maximum security facilities focused on isolation and control.
And a system focused on rehabilitation would build facilities that look more like, I don't know, vocational campuses.
Spot on. Every law passed and every sentence handed down is essentially society attempting to negotiate those 4 competing priorities.
And debating the why and how of punishment naturally forces a much, much larger conversation. I mean, if the state holds the power to lock people in cages, we have to critically examine the legitimacy of the rules themselves.
We're zooming way out now.
Yeah, we're the macro level.
Yeah.
Entering the realm of jurisprudence.
The study of legal philosophy.
Exactly. It's basically how we define what law actually is.
Jurisprudence explores the DNA of human authority. And the material we are analyzing today highlights a really profound historical and philosophical clash between 2 primary schools of thought.
Let's get into it. What's the fast one?
The first is legal positivism. This theory asserts that law is strictly a social construct. It is a set of rules created by recognized human authorities, written down and enforced by the state.
Okay, seems straightforward.
Well, here's the catch. Under positivism, the moral value of the law is completely irrelevant to its validity. If the recognized authority passes the rule, it is the law, period.
Okay, let me push back on that framework because the implications of that are terrifying.
Very much so.
Like, imagine a regime takes power, entirely corrupt, and they pass legislation that systematically strips a specific demographic of their property, their rights, and, their humanity.
A historical reality in many places, yes.
Right. So the authorities wrote it down, they passed it through their legislature, and they enforce it with their police. Under legal positivism, is that oppressive nightmare technically a valid law?
Under strict legal positivism, yes.
Right.
The validity of the law comes from the authority of the lawmaker, not from its inherent goodness. And this horrifying possibility is exactly what gave rise to the opposing school of thought.
Which is natural law theory.
Correct. Natural law argues that there are universal, objective moral principles that exist independently of human governments.
So for a human-made law to be valid, it has to align with those universal morals.
Exactly. A natural law theorist would look at your hypothetical corrupt regime and declare that their oppressive rules are not actually laws at all. They are merely organized violence masquerading as law.
So it's essentially a massive debate over whether the law is just a blunt instrument of state power or if it has to be tethered to some higher standard of human decency.
That is the core friction, yes.
And to prevent the kind of arbitrary tyranny we're talking about, modern democratic systems rely heavily on a concept called the rule of law, right?
The rule of law is the structural safeguard. It establishes that absolutely everyone, without exception, is subordinate to the law.
So nobody is above it.
Exactly. The lawmakers who write the statutes, the police who enforce them, the judges who interpret them, and the highest officials in the government, they are all bound by the exact same rules as the average citizen.
But to ensure the government can't just ignore the rules when it's convenient, the system requires an independent judiciary, like courts that operate completely free from political interference or pressure.
Right.
But, having an independent judiciary doesn't automatically mean the system is flawless.
No, certainly not.
Because the sources we're reviewing bring up some really significant critiques regarding how this machinery operates in reality. We are seeing widespread calls from activists, sociologists, and legal scholars for comprehensive reform of the criminal justice system.
Yes. The sources spend a good amount of time analyzing these calls for reform, which point to deep systemic issues within the architecture we've been discussing.
What kind of issues specifically?
Well, the literature highlights phenomena like mass incarceration, where an unprecedented percentage of the population is imprisoned.
Right.
The scholars also analyze socioeconomic disparities. They note that defendants with the resources to hire elite legal teams often secure vastly different outcomes than those who have to rely on overburdened public defenders.
Which makes sense based on what we said about it being a battle of narratives.
Precisely. Furthermore, the sources detail extensive critiques centering on systemic racism, pointing to data that suggests the machinery of enforcement and sentencing disproportionately impacts minority communities.
So the core of the critique seems to be that even if a law is written with totally neutral language, the actual physical application of that law, like who gets investigated, who gets charged, who gets maximum sentences, can produce deeply biased outcomes.
That is the essence of systemic analysis, as outlined in the text. It's examining the outcomes produced by the legal machinery and questioning whether the adversarial process and the retributive focus are actually delivering justice.
And out of these critiques, alternative frameworks have gained significant traction, right?
They have. And the most prominent one mentioned in our SAC is the concept of restorative justice.
Now, restorative justice represents a complete departure from everything we've outlined so far.
The total paradigm shift.
Yeah. We discussed retributive justice earlier, where the state asks what rule was broken, who broke it, and how much pain should be inflicted in return. Restorative justice basically throws that entire equation out the window.
Completely discards it.
It asks a completely different set of questions, like
Right.
who is harmed, what do they need, and whose obligation is it to repair that harm?
It's moving from punishment to reconciliation.
Right.
Instead of the state stepping in as the primary victim of the crime, restorative justice centers the actual human beings involved.
So how does that mechanically work?
Well, the mechanics often involve facilitated mediations where the offender must sit across from the victim and sometimes the broader community.
That sounds intense.
It is. The offender has to directly confront the human impact of their actions, take direct accountability, and participate in determining how to meaningfully repair the damage they caused.
Which could be through restitution or community service or other negotiated actions.
Exactly.
It fundamentally changes the goalposts of the entire legal system. It moves away from isolating people in cells and moves toward actively trying to heal the social fabric that was torn by the offense.
But implementing that on a large scale would require a massive reimagining of how society views accountability.
It really forces us to synthesize everything we have covered today.
Right. To understand the friction between the system we have and the alternatives being proposed, you have to understand the entire architecture first.
And that architecture is exactly what we have decoded today. We started at the street level, examining that rigid binary of innocence and guilt that allows the state to categorize human behavior in the first place.
And then we moved into the courtroom level, unpacking the whole adversarial battle between the prosecution and the defense, where competing narratives are tested in front of a jury.
We analyzed the rules of engagement, too, the immense burden of proof placed on the government, and the rights designed to shield the defendant from the raw power of the state.
And we unpack the internal conflict between retribution, deterrence, rehabilitation, and incapacitation.
Finally, we elevated to the macro level of jurisprudence. We explored the tension between legal positivism and natural law, the vital importance of the rule of law, and the profound critiques driving the push for systemic reform and restorative justice.
It's a lot to process, but it is so essential.
It really is, because you, the listener, you now have the analytical toolkit to look at the legal system and see the underlying machinery. You aren't just looking at the surface level events anymore. You actually understand the philosophical currents driving them.
It changes everything about how you consume the news.
Exactly. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought experiment to turn over in your mind.
Oh, I love these.
So we ended by discussing the shift from retributive justice to restorative justice, moving away from punishment and toward repairing harm. If our society actually embraced that restorative model fully, how would it physically change the architecture of our legal spaces?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
Right. Think about the layout of a traditional courtroom. You have the judge elevated on a bench looking down. You have the prosecution and defense physically separated at opposing tables, ready for this adversarial battle.
It's designed for conflict.
Exactly. But if the goal is no longer a battle of narratives, would we even need those opposing tables?
Probably not.
Would the courtroom transform into, a circle or a community hall? What does the physical room actually look like when the ultimate objective is healing instead of punishment?
That is a fascinating thing to visualize.
Just something to consider the next time you see a judge's gavel on the evening news, or the next time you get a jury duty summons. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep analyzing the structures around you, and we will catch you next time.